So let me talk a little bit about what I struggled with this week and what I've even struggled with more, and that is how to convey to you some ideas that are both important and memorable. And as I thought of that, I'm a software guy, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a social anthropologist by training, but I really believe that probably doesn't really interest most of you very much. But what I know you are interested in is healthcare, and that is the health of your friends and family, your sons and daughters, your mothers and fathers. And that's what I've spent the last 20 years really focused on. And that is, how do we get a better healthcare system, not only in the United States, but around the world? And how can we use some of the technology that we've heard so much about that has advanced us in so many areas to make a difference in healthcare? Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're focused on. It's about making a difference. And when you look at healthcare today, there's a question that generally gets asked. And that question is this the beginning of the end of healthcare as we've grown up with it in this country? We read about quality problems, about errors. We read about the cost of healthcare. Can we even afford to deliver healthcare like we've delivered it in the past? And I'd like to share with you, in keeping with our earlier speaker, in keeping with Rick, some positive news. And we really believe that this is the end of the beginning of what is a whole new world of healthcare that's going to open for all of us today. And that's what I'd like to talk about. There was a great article recently in the Wall Street Journal, and it talked about this, and it talked about living to 100. And the premise was that not only is it about surviving to 100 years old or older, it's about thriving. It's about living a great life. And that whole light bulb example is exactly what we were talking about. And it had some amazing statistics. In 1950, there were roughly 2,300 people who were 100 years old. And in 2050, think about it, more than 600,000 people just in the United States who will be more than 100 years old. And when you think about that, think about the bell curve and how many people who will be walking around at 120 or 130. And this is a whole different idea that we have to struggle with. But when we think about healthcare today, and you've heard some of the ideas about what's going to have the biggest impact of surviving and thriving, and what is it? And I think of that as three different doors. The first door is we just need a better system. We have to have access, and that's what's going to drive healthcare in the future. And the second door is it's a new breakthrough. And Dr. Agus, who's been a friend for a long time, amazing stuff that he's doing, and it's really kind of back to the future. It's, in many respects, about simplicity. And then the third one, which I love the best, is just a new you. Everybody's going to stop smoking, start exercising, and eat better. And how many people believe that's going to happen tomorrow? Not exactly. But I'm going to suggest something very different. That it's not the epiphany of one of us. That it's not some new breakthrough. But it's really the collaboration of all of us. It's that idea that Milton and Fred just talked about, that idea of community. And when you look at where we are today, it's seemingly hopeless. There's too many mistakes, it's too expensive, and it's too slow. And if you look at how long it takes to get these new breakthroughs that Dr. Agus was just talking about into common practice, it's amazing. Roughly now 10 years. And you compare that to someone using a BlackBerry or using Bloomberg on the floor of the stock exchange. New information comes to them accurate to within 10 seconds. That's our financial system, and our healthcare system is 10 years. So think about that difference. So I guess the question is, what's the fix? How do we fix this? Some people look to Washington. And my contention is this is not something that's going to be fixed by politicians or by Washington. So I've looked to a philosopher who I think all of us should follow, and that is Jerry Garcia. Now, for some of you, this might help you remember it a little bit better. And that is, where is this solution? The fact of the matter is it's all about us. And I would suggest to you, and you remember this from the Clinton days, right? Say it together, it's the community. Okay, but I'm going to suggest something a little different. I'm going to suggest that when you really look at the activities in a community, that the community is really smart. And there's something called collective intelligence that really comes out of communities. And that's what we're starting to learn about. And this is a really simple concept. And that is that collective intelligence is the amount of interaction between individuals. And when those individuals, the more they interact, the more you get innovation and the faster the rate of change. So think about it. You have conversations and you learn. And every time you have conversations in your house, in your community, people start to say, oh, that really worked for you? I'm going to try that. And that's innovation. And that's how we move forward. So conceptually, I think we all get it. But then we say, well, so show me some proof. Does this really work? And so let me give you two examples that I think make the point. So if you were going to build the next encyclopedia, who would you bet on? 35 people in a startup or 90,000 people who work for arguably the best, most successful technology company outside of Chicago in the world? That is Microsoft. And so let me just fill those little boxes in, and we know the end of that story. So what was the secret there? What did they figure out at Wikipedia? They figured out how to use the community and how to get millions of people to contribute for free to build something bigger than themselves. And think about the power that they created and how that changed the world. It wasn't about money. It was, to go back to what Milton and Fred said, it was about doing more with less, right? It was about collaborating. And how did they do that? They used technology. Well, let's go to another expert, because I don't want you to be biased and think that the Grateful Dead were the only people I pay attention to. So this expert is someone that many of you rely upon, Regis Philbin, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And you all know how this works. You ask a question. If you don't know the answer, you get three options. You can eliminate two of the choices. That improves your odds, we know, 50%. You can phone a friend or an expert, and we all know one. Or you can ask the studio audience. Now, who is the studio audience made up of? It's anybody who could finagle a ticket, right? Okay, so this is not exactly experts. So what happened? Well, they studied the results. Who was right most of the time? 50%, well, we know that one. 65% for those supposed friends and experts who are really going to help us. But here's the startling one, 91%. So 91% of the time when you ask the audience, that group. Now, we know this, the common term is called crowdsourcing. And it really proves that all of us are smarter than any of us. And this is back to that theme of community. So does this work in healthcare? Does this work in the community? So for those of you who've read Outliers, how many people have read Outliers? Raise your hand. So you're familiar with this story. I'll go through it quickly. So what happens is in Pennsylvania, a small community, it's kind of isolated. Generally, almost all the people in the community came from Italy. And a doctor figures out that these people have half the rate of heart disease of anywhere else in the country, and almost no men dying from heart attacks. So, of course, what's the normal thing that I first thought of? I'm reading the story. Olive oil, right? It must be that great Italian heritage. No, well, it turns out it's not the heritage. In fact, they have more obesity there, and they smoke more than the rest of the population. So what's the finding? You've read the book. It's all about community. And it's about this connectivity, this information exchange, what they did together. So again, that's one community, but how do we spread that? And how do we really take what we've learned in these individual examples and make them much broader? And we would suggest that it's all about getting connected. It's all about using the same technology that we've used in the rest of our world in healthcare today. And if you think about it, what we're doing is we're enabling physicians with technology devices called electronic health records, and that allows them to start to get connected. But what's fast happening is they're starting to use those to collaborate, and they're collaborating with patients. And then you move to where patients are saying, maybe we can do this ourselves. And last but not least, if you look really closely, you'll see a picture of Milton in Luala. And now that they have electricity, and now that they're using cell phones, they're actually using, and I think we now have nurses in Luala, using the same technology that we have at the best hospitals in America. And that's this idea of using technology to really bridge this gap. So let me give you a few other examples of how we're using this idea of a connected community in healthcare today. Now, this is all driven by a simple phenomenon, and that is that technology adoption is happening faster than ever before. If you think about the time it took to get the first 1 million people to adopt a telephone, 71 years. And the time it took to get the first 1 million users on the Xbox, 2 days. Okay? A little bit different. So an amazing change, faster than the iPhone. Really fascinating. So let's look at what's happening. Well, those Xboxes that some of you have, or some of your kids have, you ought to look more closely at them, because that Xbox, attached to a device called Kinect, can now judge your weight within 10%. It can say how many push-ups, sit-ups, and jumping jacks that you've done. And this is a whole new way to do rehab than we ever thought of before, because before your 10 visits, 2 of them were for instruction, and 8 of them were to make sure you actually did the exercises. And now we can eliminate that, and we can start to interact in a different way. Let's jump ahead to something different. A service called Patients Like Me, developed by 3 students from MIT, 2 brothers, and a third individual, a friend of theirs. And those 2 brothers had another brother who was diagnosed with ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease. And they couldn't find information anywhere else. And they wanted to normalize that. They said, where's the community of users who can share what they're doing about this terrible disease? And so they created a website called Patients Like Me. And so what's happened? Now people are going to it, and today, over 100,000 patients, over 500 conditions of people finding patients just like them. And the next step to that, which is really interesting, is some people have gotten together who share a disease, and a heart disease, a very serious but rare heart disease. They've gotten together and they said, we're going to get together and we're going to approach doctors, and we're going to say to those doctors, we actually want you to do clinical trials on us, because I know I'm the only one in this community with this disease. But in fact, there's a bunch of us if you look around the world, and we're connected, and we will be your clinical trial. And this is a whole different way of looking at things. Now, you heard Milton and Fred, and you've heard all the speakers talk about the one fundamental difference of being in healthcare than really anywhere else. And that is that healthcare is intensely personal. You know, I may run software companies during the day, but you know, the fact of the matter is, first and foremost, I'm a father. And you know, what's really interesting is I learned a lesson about community from my then 8-year-old. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so, you know, what happens? Well, at 8, unlike a lot of the children who get diagnosed, you're old enough to know that it's a bad thing, but you're not old enough to know what the answers are. So you ask your mother or your father. So the first question was, Dad, is there a cure? And so I was fortunate. I said, well, actually, I've seen the cure. I just recently was at University of Illinois, Chicago. I watched a stem cell transplant happen. And this is the cure, but you got to be a little older to have that happen. And so then the second question is, well, doesn't that cost a lot? And so I said, well, it does, but luckily I've worked hard and we'll be able to afford it. And then came the third question. Is it available? I thought it's not available to everybody. And I said, well, the good news is that you'll be one of the lucky ones. And this is what's so unique about healthcare and what is so defining about our community, because his question was, is that fair? And I think that's what separates healthcare and what really makes us a community and why this is so different. This is him today. He's 6'3", 218 pounds. At 16 years old, we know diabetes doesn't stunt your growth. And because he's bigger than me, I'm working especially hard to find a cure for him. But let me conclude with just 2 thoughts about healthcare and about this community. The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. Well, what does that really mean? What it means is we have all the answers we need today, and we're going to get more and more of them to address our healthcare issues. The challenge that we have and what we have to do is start to collaborate, to share together, to work together, to form these communities that can fundamentally change things. And if we can do that, we'll have a healthcare system, not just in the United States, but across the world that we can all be proud of. So again, I want to thank you for your time, but I want to welcome you to this new connected community of health that's going to make a fundamental difference in everything we do. Thanks very much.